John, some years ago I heard Ron Buckland from Scripture Union talk about the topic of fundamental versus secondary truths. And he focused on some fundamental truths that you don't negotiate on in the Christian sense. And then there were secondary truths with things that it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. How would you approach that particular topic?
Well, quite obviously, Ron was speaking to people of faith, and there's almost two whole streams of answers I need to give on that. I mean, for me, fundamentally, I don't believe the universe is a gigantic accident. It's a fundamental truth for me to believe that there is an intelligent purpose behind the universe. I mean, I can't make any sense of why people talk about values or anything else if that's not so. I mean, really, if there is no ultimate God and the universe is a purely accidental, completely accidental happenstance, then philosophers like Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, that students often have to study even in high school, don't make any sense to me, because you get someone like Jean-Paul Sartre says there is no meaning to the universe, and yet he was very strong about trying to stop the nuclear developments and the danger of nuclear war. Or you take a minister's son in Australia that's very well known on radio, who years ago wrote in the Sydney Morning Herald that human beings had no more ultimate significance than a grain of sand on Acapulco Beach. And I went on radio in a debate with him, and I said, well, you're always on about bad priests and bad ministers and Christians that are hypocrites and all the rest. Why the hell do you care? I mean, in the end, mate, if I need to climb over your face and stomp on you to advance my life and my wealth and everything else, there isn't no grounds upon which you can argue I ought or oughtn't or anything else. It's the law of the jungle. So, you know, to me, I go back to the fundamental, and I really do believe there is an ultimate purpose and meaning in the universe. But then when Christians want to argue about the ancient text of Genesis and, you know, how old the world is and how long it took for creation and all that stuff, to me, that is really secondary truth. And it worries me that masses of time and money are spent by some Christians going on and on about that. And they're supposed to be Christians. They do much better to go on and on about Jesus. Now, to me, he's a fundamental truth, because I want to understand what God is like. Looking at priests, looking at the history of the Christian church, I feel like, I hate to say it, but oh my God, you feel like saying when you see that. The horror of the way in which religious institutions have often behaved in recent times, as we've seen it, about the abuse of children. But if I want to know what God's like, it's a fundamental truth. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So to me, Jesus is fundamental truth in knowing what God's like. And if it comes to how I should behave, the things Christians get caught up with about dress and what sports you're going to be, I mean, sometimes religious people argue over gnats and sandflies rather than over the big issues of life. The issues of what is really true, it's a difficult one, Hank, because, you know, in a short comment like this, a dozen of us could sit in this room and pick up a Bible and go to a specific passage, and we could spend the whole night arguing over some minor issue of interpretation from one sentence. I mean, sometimes people get caught up in the most ridiculous peripheral arguments. But who am I? Why am I here? How should I live if I am really made in the image of God, as the old book says? How should I behave socially consistent with being made in that image? If I say I'm Christian, then how can I say I'm Christian if my behaviour is quite contrary to what I see of the teaching and life of Jesus Christ? Now, I don't care. You don't have to believe in Jesus then. You can believe in frogs if you like. You've got a right to make that choice. God's given us that kind of freedom. But if you say you're going to be Christian, it's a fundamental truth that you should be at least substantially living a life that's consistent with his teaching and with what we have of the record of the way he lived. Otherwise, you can say, I'm a religious person, I like Jesus as a guru out in the edge there. You say all that. But it's a fundamental truth to me that to say you are Christian, not as to say, I go to church, because dear old Billy Graham, still alive at nearly 100 years of age, I remember when he was a young preacher said, if you put somebody to sleep in a garage, it doesn't make them a motor car. And sticking someone in a church and arguing about the minutiae of what kind of music and what kind of vestments and what kind of seating and everything, the things people get caught up in.
Yeah.
But sitting in a church, that's not a fundamental. The fundamental is whether if I say I'm Christian, I walk in the ways of Jesus. I mean, if we went any further in this, there are heaps of issues. There are issues you could just sit around that great old thing we call the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbour as yourself. Don't steal and covet anything, from personal relationships to bust up a marriage or to the ownership of property. Don't do any of that. Thou shalt not covet. Let your word be a word that can be trusted. If you shake hands on it, unfortunately today you've got to sign a complex document and read the small print. What the old book's saying in a fundamental truth is, I should be able to trust you. Now, unfortunately, we know the reality is in our world, the minutiae is what sinks you when you sign up on some insurance document or something. The fundamental truths are all there in 10 Commandments, and they're lived out in a social context, in a religious context, wonderfully in the life of Jesus.
Thank you.